Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm Rhino, and in today's video I'll be talking about the Type AT, which is a premium Chinese era to medium tank for the Eastern Alliance in the Cold War game mode, and this is basically the WZ-122 without the ATGMs and a few small tweaks here and there to the armour, the mobility and the gun. I'll be comparing both of the tanks in today's video. I'll tell you all you need to know about the Type AT. I have two replays for you showing you how this tank handles and how it performs in battle. I'll also tell you about my commander and equipment setup, and I'll tell you which tank I prefer, which I have a feeling is the same as most people that have played both the tanks, but you'll have to wait to the end to find out which tank I prefer. So in terms of the gold value, this tank is 100 gold more at the base bundle than the WZ-122, coming in at 11,400 gold, which is a sort of very pricey tank for a mediocre tank is what I'll go with for now. There are some differences in terms of the bonuses. So the WZ-122 has a 50% silver bonus earn, whereas the Type AT has 5% more at 55% silver bonus earn. The WZ-122 has a 10% XP earn, and the Type AT has a 15% XP earn, so 5% more there as well. Unfortunately, the Type AT earns 15% less crew XP at 10% than the WZ-122 at 25% crew XP. In terms of the statistics of the tanks then, well, they both have the same hit points and view range, coming in at 2,560 hit points and 480 meters view range. And they both have the same 105mm gun, or they both have a 105mm gun, I should say. The WZ-122 has a smooth bore barrel, meaning that the shell velocity on the standard rounds is better than the Type AT. So in terms of the DPM, the Type AT comes out on top with 3,450 base DPM compared to the WZ's 3,440.4 DPM. The WZ has a 470 alpha damage, whereas the Type AT has a 460, so 10 HP less alpha damage on the Type AT's gun, but you do have a better rate of fire and better DPM. The Type AT also has better penetration on its standard and its premium rounds, with 432mm of penetration on its standard and 450mm of penetration on its premium rounds, compared to the WZ-122's 372 on its standard and 440 on its premium rounds. The shell velocity, like I said, is better with the WZ-122 because it is a smooth bore barrel. It has a 1615 meters a second shell velocity on its standard rounds, whereas the Type AT only has 1455, so it's not too much of a difference, but it is quite noticeable at longer ranges. The Type AT, however, does have a better shell velocity on its premium rounds at 1173 meters a second compared to the WZ-122's 950 meters a second. Of course, you do have to bear in mind that you do have the multiple weapon system on the WZ-122 and that option to switch to the ATGMs should you need it, so that is a massive advantage in my opinion for the WZ-122. So the Type AT, in terms of its gun handling, it has an 8-second base reload, a 2.1 second base aim time, which is 0.1 worse than the WZ-122. However, it does have a 0.5 better accuracy at 0.31. The gun depression on both of the tanks is the same at 5 degrees, however, the Type AT does have 3 degrees less gun elevation. You carry 48 rounds on both of the tanks, however 8 of the rounds on the WZ-122 are ATGMs, so you do have to bear that in mind. In terms of the mobility, it comes out with the Type AT in the lead in most aspects. It has a 730 horsepower engine compared to the WZ-122 690, which means that the horsepower per ton on the Type AT is 19.21 compared to the WZ-122's 18.43. The Type AT also goes quicker forwards and backwards at 65.2 km an hour forwards and 24.1 km an hour backwards compared to the WZ-122's 55 forwards and 22.5 backwards. However, the WZ-122 has got better traverse speeds on the hull and the turret at 46 degrees a second on the hull and 36 degrees a second on the turret, whereas the Type AT only has 44 degrees a second on the hull and 32 degrees a second on the turret. In terms of the armour, the turret is better on the Type AT at 250mm on the front, 175 on the sides and 75mm on the rear. The cupola on the Type AT is 130mm. The upper plate is 20mm more at 120mm, but the lower plate is 80mm, which is 20mm less than the lower plate of the WZ-122. And on the Type AT you do have a 25mm spaced armour band along the upper half of the side of the hull, which does absorb some damage from ATGMs and absorb HE rounds as well. In general terms, I think the armour is pretty much the same as the WZ-122. It's slightly better and you might get a few more auto ricochet angles, but you can't rely on the armour, but it does hold up against some rounds at some angles, so you can bounce a few rounds, as you'll see in these two replays. In terms of my equipment and commander setup then, I have an advanced loader, gun stabilizer and traction system on my equipment, and I have 6th Sense, Born Leader, Rapid Loading, Steady Aim, Rapid Aim, Snapshot, Run and Gun, Armour Angling and Track Mechanic on my commander, which is the same commander I use for both of the tanks, the WZ-122 and the Type AT. So those statistics alter my statistics ever so slightly. So I now have a 4,627.6 DPM on the Type AT compared to 4,432 on the WZ-122. That brings us to the end of the first replay, where we finish in the MVP slot, picking up 7.1k direct damage, 1400 assistance, 2 kills, 1522 base experience points and just shy of 300,000 silver. So I'll continue talking about just how the commander and equipment setup affects my statistics, and then I'll talk about the tanks in question and which one I prefer. So we're now into the second replay of the video, and I'll just continue to talk about how my commander and equipment setup affects some of the other statistics of my Type AT. I now have a 521 meters view range. I now go 71.7 kilometers an hour forwards, 26.5 kilometers an hour backwards, and my hull and turret traverse have improved to 48.4 degrees a second on the hull and 34.75 degrees a second on the turret. So I think I'm now ready to tell you my opinion on which tank you should go for if you are in the market for an Era 2 premium medium tank, and it's definitely going to be the WZ-122. And if you've watched many of the other YouTubers or Twitch streamers and just looked at what's been said on Twitter and Facebook and that kind of thing, then I think everyone agrees that the WZ-122 seems to be the best sort of value and the best choice for your money. And I think the main reason for that is because of the firepower. The differences are so little between both of the tanks, and having the ATGMs and that multiple weapon system, meaning you can fire switch between both of the ATGMs and the 105mm so quickly and fire so quickly after each other. It just means that the WZ-122 has a much better sort of firepower. It means that you're able to one-on-one tank so much easier, and it means that people are a little bit more scared of you, scared to rush you and that kind of thing. And I've had better games in the WZ-122. I learned a lot more silver, had a lot more fun. I think it's definitely a more unique vehicle. This is just a standard run-of-the-mill medium tank, and it makes having 5 degrees of gun depression and the flaws of the Type AT and the WZ-122 much worse on this tank, in my opinion, not having that ability to go to the ATGM. So having that 5 degrees of gun depression, like I said, having the poor gun elevation, having the, you know, armor that is going to be buttered by pretty much everything that works occasionally, it's just not going to work out, to be perfectly honest. And I think that although you can still have good games, as you'll see in both of these replays, it's definitely going to be the WZ-122 that you're going to have the best games in, those monster games, and it's going to be a lot more sort of better for you in the long run. And I just I can't really think of a reason why you'd want to pick the Type 80 over the WZ-122, apart from maybe if you want to carry an extra 8 shells of sort of single fire rounds with the 105mm, or if you like the ever so slightly improved mobility, or the ever so slightly improved armour. I think it's just an all-round better package with the WZ-122, and it's 100 gold cheaper. So yeah, I'm not really sure why they brought this tank out, apart from the obvious reason, which is those big green paper things that we hand around for goods. Having said that, if you do pick up this tank and you're a collector, then of course it can still have some good games. It's nice to have the higher shell velocity on the premium rounds should you want to fire heat at Era 2, which I just carry full APF SDS rounds, because I find that the the standard shell velocity is still better than the heat rounds, and the penetration is more than enough to go through most of the things that you're going to be firing at. That's one thing in terms of the penetration that is better on the Type 80, is the standard penetration. And I guess for a free-to-play player who doesn't want to fire, I don't know, heat rounds very often, or it isn't very good at shooting for weak points, this one might come off better in some circumstances, but it's so negligible and the differences aren't big enough for me to recommend this Type 80 at all. It's just a very standard run-of-the-mill tank, and you'll be much better off with the WZ-122. So that's my opinion on the tank, and we'll continue to talk about the gameplay in the background. I'll just talk you through what I've been doing in this battle. So I've just been going around to aggressive locations, using view range, trying to spot out tanks, using ridgelines that I'm able to use 5 degrees of gun depression on. So being a relatively lower profile tank, you are able to use some ridgelines, especially on Thiepval Ridge, and sort of keep most of your hull covered and only expose your turret, which is rounded, so you might have the ability to bounce off some shells with auto ricochet angles. And I've just been sniping, putting damage in where I can. This tank and the WZ-122 is very good at firing at sort of short, mid and long ranges because of the penetration and because of the shell velocity. It just makes it a sort of ease. Of course, you can have the problems with things like the FE4-11 penetrating. If you aim for weak points and you know where to shoot, then that is obviously going to help you massively. But the penetration with this thing, you're definitely going to be able to go through a lot easier when you're shooting the sides of the FE4-11 and things like that. But for most of the tanks in Era 2, you're going to have no problem, and the shell velocity on both of the tanks is definitely good enough. And it's especially good on the WZ-122 to fire at sort of light tanks on the move and quicker tanks in the distance because of that fantastic shell velocity on the smoothbore barrel. So there's 3 light tanks left on this game, and it's just about maximising damage at the end of the game. I've got 2,200 hit points left, and I'm just going to go in, and I don't care if I take an ATGM or a shot or two, or even if I die. I just want to get as much damage and as much silver as possible, and that's the thing that you want to do with these premium tanks in Cold War, is rack up that silver, right? So we've had a great game so far at 6.2k direct damage and 3.6k assistance, and it's just about finding those pesky light tanks. And as BM2, who fires an ATGM right at us, goes through us because the armour isn't fantastic and you definitely can't rely on any of the plates. However, we have enough to take it, and we're going to be able to fire at this BMP2 now and try and finish off with a ram, but he's just managed to dupe me there. But it looks like his reverse speed isn't as good as he thought it was, and we managed to take him out for the final kill, finishing that off with 7 tanks intact on our team. So that's another MVP slot there, another victory. We finished with 7.2k direct damage, 3.6k assistance with a first class 1846 base experience points, and a good amount of silver at 343,000 silver. So I hope you've enjoyed this little comparison between Type 80 and the WZ-122. I definitely recommend the WZ-122 over this, and if you have any questions at all, then feel free to comment. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all have a great weekend, and until next time, I'll see you on the battlefield, and bye for now.